Welcome to the Point Loma Nazarene University Co-Teaching Training. My name is Jill Hamilton Bunch and I'm the Associate Dean for Initial Teacher Preparation here in Point Loma School of Education. We're going to spend some time together over the next hour talking about co-teaching and the modules and work that you'll be doing with your student teacher while you co-teach. We'd like to welcome you as a co-teacher to this experience. What I'd like you to do before you begin the process of watching this training and video is to download the PowerPoint that you'll see on the links here in the CP documents. You can either print that for your reference, or you can, if you have a split screen, you can look at the PowerPoint while you're watching the video, whatever is easiest for you, but you will need that PowerPoint. Also be prepared at the end of our hour together. You will be taking a short survey. It's a quiz based on the information that you've received, and that's just a way for us to track that you've completed the training and to make sure that you've gotten all of the information that we hope that you'll have. Again, welcome, and I'm looking forward to this experience for you as a co-teacher, and we welcome you to the Point Loma family. So we'll just begin with talking a little bit about who we are as a university. Point Loma is a Nazarene college where our main campus is located in San Diego. Some of you are on the Mission Valley campus, just 8 miles inland from our main campus there. Some in the Inland Empire, and some here at the Bakersfield campus. We also have student teachers throughout the state of California, so for those of you who are in areas located outside those areas that I just mentioned, welcome to you. We're excited you're part of the Point Loma family. So if you can take just a moment to review our vision and our core values, those are printed for you on slide number 2. So just take a moment to review those, as well as our mission for the university, which is on slide 3. Once you've completed that quick review, I'd like to talk a little bit about our teacher candidates, and we do refer to our candidates as candidates, and we refer to the students in your classrooms as students. So as you're working with your teacher candidate, we'll refer to them as a candidate, and we refer to you as the cooperating teacher rather than the master teacher, since you're going to be working side by side with your candidate teacher. A little bit about what our candidates have experienced prior to student teaching, which we call clinical practice. Prior to clinical practice, our candidates have completed foundational and methodological coursework. So they're coming to you in the last weeks of their program, and they have received content instruction as well as pedagogical instruction prior to entering your classroom. They've also observed for 60 hours in a classroom, and just for your reference, I'm referring to slide 4 in your PowerPoint. They've observed for 60 hours in a classroom prior to entering your classroom. They've obtained a certificate of clearance or the equivalent of that. So they've been cleared through the Department of Justice, and they've also purchased $1 million liability insurance prior to entering your classroom. So they're all covered as far as being on your campus. They've also passed the CBEST, and they've passed the CSET, which is the subject matter competence test for their particular area. So if they're teaching 3rd grade, then they've passed the multiple subjects. If it's high school, they've passed English or math, depending on the subject area that they plan to teach. And for special education, they've passed either the multiple subject or a subject specific, depending on whether they'll teach special ed K through 6 or special education 7 through 12. They've also passed the teacher performance assessments 1 and 2. And the teacher performance assessments are assessments that are part of the system for credentialing in California. They're required of candidates from all universities across the state. And our candidates have completed teacher performance assessments 1 and 2. In your classroom, if they're in student teaching 1, clinical practice 1, they will be completing TPA 3, which has to do with assessment of students, and they choose a focus student and work with that student. If they're in clinical practice phase 2, then they'll be completing TPA 4. And TPA 4 does include videotaping. That is part of our memorandum of understanding with your school district. So our candidates have been approved for videotaping in the classroom. And your candidate will be very aware of both of these requirements. And so your only role in that is supporting them in the completion of that task. They're quite aware of what the requirements are of that task. let's move to slide 5, and let's talk a little bit about co-teaching and why we're moving to a system of the teacher and the candidate working side by side rather than the teacher teaching and then the candidate teaching in isolation. So on slide 6, you'll see a brief definition of co-teaching. And co-teaching comes out of the work of, originally out of special education background, of teachers pushing into classrooms and working alongside general education teachers, so special education teachers working along general education teachers. The key with co-teaching is that both teachers are actively involved from day one. So your candidate may be observing you from day one, but this isn't a passive observation. This is them observing very specifically what you're doing as a teacher. And then eventually our goal in co-teaching is that those roles shift by the end of the phase, and that the co-teaching candidate is actually taking more ownership and the lead role in planning and management and such. So the goal here is a medical model. So if you've seen Grey's Anatomy or any other medical show, you'll see interns in a hospital situation. That medical model of an apprenticeship is the key to co-teaching. So it's two teachers working side by side. So we're excited to move to this new model. And on page 7, I'm just going to read this slide because it gives us a nice overview of the purpose of co-teaching. The basic purpose of any student teaching program is to provide a situation in which student teachers learn and practice varied techniques of teaching while working with real students under the direction of a certified teacher in a public school. So you'll notice that under the direction of a certified teacher, and that's really where co-teaching comes in, is that the candidate is working with you under your direction. So let's look at slide 8 and talk a little bit about the basics for co-teaching. And as we look at slide 8, we talk about that key word that you're going to hear over and over in the co-teaching model, which is both. From day one, the cooperating teacher and the teacher candidate are both prepared. So this isn't a system where the co-teacher, the candidate is observing you or learning through watching. This is a model where the candidate is learning through doing day one. So they need to be prepared as you prepare each day. And we'll talk a little more about that in the forms and expectations training, but they are doing what you do each day. So if you get there at 7 in the morning, they get there at 7 in the morning. If you leave at 4 in the afternoon, they leave at 4 in the afternoon. And again, we'll talk more about that in the forms training that you'll also watch along with this training. Together you'll attend pairs training, and pairs training takes place on the university campus, and this is an opportunity for you to get to know your teaching candidate specifically. So this training talks about co-teaching. That training specifically will be an opportunity for you to meet your candidate and talk a little bit about those intricacies of working with that specific candidate. And so we look forward to welcoming you then. The teacher candidate and the cooperating teacher should plan lessons together throughout the experience. And if you can just highlight that for me, we're on slide 8, bullet 2, and just that first line is critically important. The candidate is planning with you from day one. Now again, at first that's going to be them observing you planning, and you're kind of talking that through with the candidate, but eventually we'd like to have them take the lead as the planner in that situation. So again, throughout the experience, they'll be moving into more of a leadership role. On slide 9, a little bit about the co-teaching basics. As we said earlier, the teacher candidate begins the first day of the experience using co-teaching strategies as soon as you can get them into that seat. Remember that our candidates have experienced 60 hours of observation and participation in classrooms, and they've also, many of them, been involved in substitute teaching. So they should be pretty ready to go from the first day, at least with maybe taking over a small group or taking roles, gradually leading them in. You'll see a schedule in the forms section of the training and in the forms you see on this site that will give you a suggested timeline as they move into that work. The cooperating teacher provides modeling and coaching, making the invisible visible. And again, we're on slide 9, bullet 2. And if you can just circle that term for me, making the invisible visible, by explicitly sharing their rationale for instructional, curricular, and management decisions. So our candidates are really equipped to see good instruction and recognize it. What makes the cooperating teacher so valuable is explaining to the candidate why they made the choices that they made. So did you see how I redirected that student rather than confronting that student? Did you see how when I saw on the whiteboards that the kids didn't get it, I stopped immediately and retaught that and had them show me again and did a quick check for understanding. So it's really helping them to understand that rationale for the choices that you're making. So that's really the apprentice piece here. And there are lots of ways to do that in your classroom. As an academic coach, you may think about just, I would often just look over the heads of the kids and tell my candidate, this is why I did that. Or I may just jot down a note to myself to have that quick conversation with them. Again, there are many ways to do that. You'll choose the way that is comfortable for you, but that's essentially what this time is that practice with real students, making those invisible teacher decisions visible for an apprentice. Let's look at slide 10 together, and you'll see the key elements of co-teaching. And the first is training and preparation. You're participating in the training right now. And really the most important thing that you'll recognize as a cooperating teacher, and I'm sure many of you have been a cooperating teacher before, is that your own preparation is so critical, including them in that preparation. So as you're lesson planning, they're lesson planning with you. As you're making choices and attending PLCs, including them in that process. Also, we want to make sure that that we all understand that this is a collaborative partnership. We are definitely guests in your school and school district, and we want this to be an additive experience for your school and for you as a cooperating teacher, that we want you to see the candidate as another set of hands in the classroom who is making that work in your classroom even more full by having another equipped adult there. It is critically important that there are some clearly defined expectations, including who's going to teach when, and how much time certain things are going to take as you plan. And then finally, the last bullet there on slide 10, if you can just highlight that for me, designated planning time for co-teaching. So setting up a specific time in each week, in each day, where you're having a conversation about planning for the next day or for the next week. That's really critical because school time is so tight and the contact time with students is so great. We want to make sure that there's a designated planning time where you're going to be working with your candidate specifically on just looking at planning for the weeks ahead. Very quickly on slide 11, you're going to see the co-teaching benefits there. And as all of us as classroom teachers, we've all been through some form of clinical practice or student teaching, and we can reflect on all the benefits for us as student teachers and maybe some things we would do differently as we move into a master teacher role or a cooperating teacher role. So just very quickly, the key benefits for co-teaching for our candidates are that they're really getting an opportunity to put things into practice very quickly. And then on the right-hand side, the benefit to the school and to you as a teacher is that it's very productive for your students. Again, having that other capable adult in the classroom. So let's look at slide 12. This might be a good time, if you'd like to, just to turn off the training or just put this on pause and maybe take a minute to review what you've learned about co-teaching, maybe write down some notes and maybe a question or two if you have that, moving into co-teaching strategies. There is contact information in our form section here on this website. So if there at any point you have any questions, just be sure to contact someone from your campus and we're happy to help you with any questions that you have. So once you've done that and just reviewed for a minute, we'll come back together and look at some co-teaching strategies. So let's go ahead and move into a conversation about co-teaching strategies. So if you can make sure that you're on the PowerPoint slide 12, let's talk about what co-teaching looks like in a classroom. So on slide 13, you're going to see the most common co-teaching strategy as candidates are beginning to move into instruction, and that's one teach, one observe. And I'm just going to read this slide and then talk a little bit about what this means. One teacher has primary instructional responsibility while the other gathers specific observational information on students or the instructing teacher. So there's a lot packed into that one phrase there. The key words there are specific observational information. So as you're doing one teach, one observe, at first this will be the candidate observing you as the cooperating teacher, and you'll tell them exactly what you want them to observe for. So you may say, Sigrid, I'd like you to watch me while I model this piece of a reading lesson. So I want you to be watching for what I do during this part of the reading lesson. You may say, I'd like you to observe management today. You can also say, I'd like you to observe the kids or even this specific student so you can see how I manage that student or how I manage that time. Many times a good observational piece is look at my pacing. How did I pace and what did I do for reteaching, for differentiation, because that's something that's very difficult for us to replicate at the university in a classroom. So pacing and management are two of the things that we almost cannot overteach in the clinical practice teaching experience because our candidates really have to have real kits to see that in action. So at first, that one teach, one observe is going to be my candidate observing me as the cooperating teacher. By the end of the phase, my hope, my plan is that I'm observing them and the candidate is saying to me, here's where I think I'm doing well and here are some places where I feel like I'm not as strong. Can you observe for X, Y, and Z? What we want to make very clear as we talk about co-teaching is that the candidate is in full participation in this mode. This is not a situation where you're constantly having to direct the candidate or be very specific about exactly what you want them to do. We do want the candidates to have full buy-in and to take up because they will be in their own classrooms. If you're in phase 1, they'll be in their own classroom in 15 weeks. If they're in phase 2, they'll be in their own classroom in 8 weeks. So we really do want to make sure that the candidates are fully participating, and we want to make that clear to you as a cooperating teacher that they should be fully participatory. So that one teach, one observe, we're going to use quite a bit. Again, at the beginning, that's going to be the candidate observing us as the cooperating teachers, and at the end of the phase, it would be us observing them. One teach, one assist is slide 14 on your PowerPoint. And this is where one teacher has primary instructional responsibility while the other assists students with their work, monitors behaviors, or corrects assignments. So this is the one teach is one of you, either the candidate or the teacher, cooperating teacher, providing the instruction, and then the other is acting as an assistant in that role. The key here is that whoever is assisting is not only assisting the students. If the assistant is the candidate, they're also observing how the lesson is being taught and how the kids are receiving that lesson. So this is a really powerful experience for the candidate because they can actually see how kids are picking up on the instruction, how they're learning, and where the student's misunderstandings may lie, and how the teacher checks for understanding, and all of those pieces of instruction. So you'll see that on the continuum of release of responsibility, one teach, one observe, we then move into assisting, which is a higher level of responsibility. So this can be at the beginning, the candidate assisting the teacher, and then towards the end, this would be the teacher assisting the candidate. So one teach, one assist is the next level of releasing responsibility. On slide 15, we have station teaching. And this is where the co-teaching pair divide the instructional content into two parts. Each teacher instructs one group and then switches, or groups spend a designated amount of time at each station. So this would be one teacher teaching perhaps in a math lesson, one teacher may be teaching the more arithmetic aspects of the lesson, and the other teaches a more conceptual understanding of the lesson, and then the kids switch. So you divided your class in half. Or if you have an instructional aide in your classroom, the aide may be at a station, the cooperating teacher would be at a station, and then the candidate would be at a station. So station teaching, we're probably all familiar with. This is much like what we've done with reading groups in the past. And station teaching gives the candidate an opportunity to work with a smaller group, so that they can get their management in place. It also helps them to do some independent planning. Again, with your supervision and support, they're now beginning to plan their own lesson, and you're supporting them in that work. So it's a little bit of a protected environment for the candidate, moving them into more full responsibility. Parallel teaching, and this is slide 16. Parallel teaching is where you're both instructing at the same time. In this approach, each teacher instructs half the students. The two teachers are addressing the same instructional material using the same teaching strategies. So essentially what this does is we've planned a lesson together. Candidate takes half the students, cooperating teacher takes the other half, and what this does is it just cuts down in the number of kids. So essentially you're reducing your class size by half. And the advantage of this is it's just easier to get around to all the kids and check for understanding. If you have a class of 20, you've now created 2 classes of 10. And that parallel teaching piece is there. Again, this is helpful for the candidate because it gives them kind of a protected or an easier move into the larger classroom setting. It's also helpful for you as a cooperating teacher because you can see the candidate as they're teaching. You can kind of see if their pacing is matching your pacing. And if you just want to make that note on this particular slide, this is where I think it's incredibly helpful to teach the candidate pacing. Because if we're both teaching the same lesson to 2 groups of kids, our pacing should be pretty similar. You know, obviously, there are some nuances to differentiating in those pieces, but it helps the candidate kind of see how quickly or how slowly they should be going. Again, all of these strategies are designed to help the candidate, but they're even more fully designed to help the students in our rooms so that they're getting two adults in the classroom rather than having just a student teacher who's new to the profession on their own. So again, parallel teaching is a good strategy for helping the candidate learn that pacing. Let's talk a little bit about supplemental teaching. I think this is my favorite because I always dreamed of having a supplemental teacher in my own classroom, and so I love this because it's just a way to really help kids and to really dig in instructionally. So on slide 17, you have a description there of supplemental teaching, and I'm just going to read that for us. This strategy allows one teacher to work with students at their expected grade level, while the other teacher works with those students who need the information and or materials extended or remediated. So this is a time where if I have kids who need extra help, then I can have my candidate work with those students who need the extra help, or perhaps I can work with those students while my candidate teaches the other students. So this really is a time for differentiation. This is a time to help the candidates see what to do with students who need extra help, or even help in a different way. So I think this is a really powerful piece for the candidate to learn about. What does it look like when we really differentiate? How do we do something differently rather than repeating what we did with a smaller group? So really helping them understand what differentiation is. And I think it's incredibly helpful as a classroom teacher to have that extra set of competent hands to help my kids who need the extra help. And it's helpful to the kids, obviously, because they're getting the extra help that they need. So supplemental teaching, again, is the one that I think is the huge benefit to the students. Then number 18, slide 18 rather, you're going to see alternative or differentiated instruction. Differentiated teaching, sorry about that. And I'm just going to read this slide. Alternative teaching strategies provide two different approaches to teaching the same information. The learning outcome is the same for all students, however, the avenue for getting there is different. So we talked a little bit about supplemental teaching being for kids who were struggling with the concept. Alternative or differentiated teaching is dividing your teaching based on how kids learn. So if you see that some kids get something in a more conceptual way, then one of you would teach that concept conceptually and one of you would teach it more methodologically. So this is different. Supplemental teaching is in addition to, and alternative differentiated teaching is instead of or different than. So if you can just make that note. So supplemental teaching is in addition to or additional help for those kids who need it, whereas alternative differentiated teaching is just two kinds of teaching of the same content. So it wouldn't necessarily be for kids who didn't get the concept. It would be just teaching the same concept in two ways. I think this is a really powerful piece too for our candidates because again, that's something that's difficult to replicate at the university, that understanding that there's more than one way to deliver the same instruction. So a really powerful strategy again. Team teaching just kind of sums up what we've talked about so far. So let's take a quick break and let me have you go back and review those approaches to co-teaching. And I'm going to review those very quickly as we go through so you can just make some additional notes. So just take a minute to review slides, the slides that start with one teach, one observe, and end with that alternative, let me see, the alternative differentiated teaching. Take a moment to review those, and then I'm going to go through those very quickly just for a quick review, and then we'll come back together and talk a little bit about those advantages of team teaching. Okay, so let's take just a minute to review those co-teaching strategies that we talked about in the last section. And I'm starting with slide number 13, and I'm just going to review those very quickly. The first is one teach, one observe, where the candidate or the cooperating teacher is teaching and the other is observing closely for specified information. One teach, one assist, where the candidate or the cooperating teacher is teaching and the other is assisting with the lesson. Station teaching, where the candidate and the cooperating teacher are working with small groups of students on different activities. Parallel teaching, where the candidate and the cooperating teacher are teaching the same lesson to half the class. Supplemental teaching, where the candidate or the cooperating teacher is ensuring that kids who need extra help are getting that extra help during a small group time. And then alternative or differentiated teaching, and this again is the same concept taught in two different ways by the candidate and the cooperating teacher. So let's talk a little bit about what team teaching looks like when it's done well. And we're on slide number 19, so you can make sure that you're following along on your PowerPoint. Well-planned team-taught lessons exhibit an invisible flow of instruction with no prescribed, sorry about that, division of authority. Both teachers are actively involved in the lesson. And again, from the kids' perspective, and you'll see this in the next line, it's two teachers working together. And we've all seen co-teaching in our own teaching lives, and we've seen when that's done well. And when it's done well, to me, it reminds me of good parenting, where the mom and the dad are in sync, and they're working together for the best for the kids. So it's the same thing with team teaching. And then finally, our last slide. What does good co-teaching look like? We'll go through this together just bullet by bullet. And this is our last slide, and we'll be wrapping up in just a minute. Teacher candidates will be expected to contribute ideas from the very beginning of the experience. And we talked about that in the introduction. It's critical that the candidates are involved right away, and they're coming with lots of experience in classrooms, really ready to go. For those of you who have candidates in phase 2, they've already done 7 weeks of full-day student teaching. So they're especially ready to just jump right in right away. Engage students and assist with their learning from the very first day. So this is not a passive experience for our candidates. This is them being engaged with students right away. They're expected to take on full leadership in planning, instruction, and assessment. And if you can just circle that for me, that's the third bullet there on slide 20. They should be participating and taking up in those that planning, leadership, and assessment role. This is not about you having to direct them or tell them, you shouldn't have to remind them that you're doing lesson planning, or remind them that they need to stay for the after-school staff meeting. They're involved in the life of school just as you're involved in the life of the school. And I always jokingly said that my student teaching candidates were my shadow, because it really should be that way. They should be participating actively in the life of the school just as you participate actively in the life of the school. And the reason for that is, again, that they are just ready to enter the classroom as they leave you. So we really want to ensure that they have full accountability for entering a really important profession. We're all very committed to this work, and we want our candidates to show that same commitment. That's critical to us as a university and to our profession as a whole. They should demonstrate their competencies as a teacher. They should demonstrate at a beginning level the same competencies that they will be expected to have as a first-year teacher. So I know many times as a cooperating teacher you may have been involved with induction or BITSA or academic coaching, or even other cooperating teacher experiences in your lifetime as a teacher. We know kind of what that competency looks like for a beginning teacher. So it is not going to be to the same level of sophistication as a cooperating teacher has, or a 10-year veteran or a 20-year veteran. But we do expect that they have the habits of mind and the attitudes and the openness to learning, so that they can in 10 or 20 years have the same competence that we have. So please hold them highly accountable for the same things that you hold yourself highly accountable for. And then the last one is they should have opportunities to teach alone. So in a more traditional model in the past, we've had a solo week or 2 weeks where we left the candidate and we left the classroom so that they could have full control of the classroom. And the expectation is that at some point they will have full control of the classroom, and that may be the one teach, one observe. And remember that we may experience several of these strategies in one day. It's not one teach, one observe for Monday. It could be one teach, one observe for math. And then in the afternoon, it's one teach, one assist for social studies. So your goal is to move them to be fully capable and independent enough to be in a classroom without supervision or support. I mean, supervision from the school, but not day-to-day, full-day supervision. So please do hold the candidate very accountable. We want to make sure that as a professional, that the goal here is for them to be better equipped because they've spent more time with you. as the cooperating teacher. So that's the goal of the co-teaching model, is to give your kids a good experience, to give you a good experience, and to make sure that our candidates get even more learning than they would have gotten in a more traditional model, because you're in the room and you have that sophisticated practitioner knowledge. So we thank you for your willingness to be a cooperating teacher for Point Loma Nazarene University. We're excited for you to have our candidates and for our candidates to be part of the life of your classroom. Thank you for your willingness to be part of this process.